morning, good evening, and good afternoon from wherever you are joining us from. Welcome to yet another session of the conversation. My name is Muhammed Sila. I will do justice to only introduce the host and the speaker for tonight's session. Decolonizing migration, prospect of African youth demographic is the topic of discussion, and I am happily joined by Mr. Muhammed Lamin Dibba and Haffsa Kouskous. Haffsa Kouskous is currently a PhD student at the Graduate Institute of Geneva in Switzerland. Her PhD is in international history and politics, and she is specializing on normalization of military violence in the MENA region, Syria, as a study, as a case study. She has also been to Yonsei University in South Korea, where she did her Bachelor's of Arts with a major in political science and international relations and social justice and leadership. She was also at Yale University in New Haven in Connecticut, in USA, where she participated in law and international relations seminars and completed her capstone project. Right at the African Leadership Academy at the ALA in Johannesburg in South Africa, she was interested in entrepreneurial leadership, African studies, writing, and rhetoric curriculum. She also completed the Cambridge A-level exams in history and French, and other very interesting studies. And on our experience, quite a lot of experience he has, we are proudly joined by someone who forms or was part of a working group for the World Conference on Intercultural and Interfaith Dialogue. This happened sometime, and also sometime from September 2021 to December 2023, where she'll be, she has exercise experience in International Parliamentary Union. Haffsa has a lot of experience in so many things, and she's happily joining us today to discuss something very close to our heart, something that really disturbs the world. I'm also joined by Muhammed Lamin Dibba. Muhammad is currently a student and will be the host for tonight's session. He's a student at Geneva Graduate Institute, someone who we are always happy to have him by us. I'm sure this conversation is going to be one of the most interesting conversations so far. Muhammad is excited, and he is very happy to be joined by Haffsa. Muhammad, Haffsa, welcome to the program, and thanks everyone for joining us. Have an interesting session.
Thank you very much, Sheikh Omar Silla, for your kind words in your introduction. Good evening from the beautiful city of Geneva, Switzerland, wherever you might be. We welcome you to this very important conversation. As Silla mentioned, our guest this evening is Ms. Haffsa Kouskous. We will be discussing about migration as decolonization, scooping into the prospects of Africa's youth demography. Haffsa, welcome to this very important conversation, and it's a privilege to have you here.
Thank you so much, Muhammad, and thank you, Sila, for the beautiful introduction. Thank you so much for having me today and for extending the invite for me to be able to share my insights and my thoughts on this thought-provoking topic. Greetings from Geneva as well, and thank you for everybody who's joining us online from all over the world.
Thank you very much, Haffsa. This topic is very crucial. You might agree with me that migration as decolonization is complex and nuanced one that has been gaining traction in recent years. It challenges the traditional understanding of migration, which often focus on economic factors and individual choices, instead of placing migration within the broader context of historical and structural inequalities rooted in colonialism. Haffsa, how does the concept of migration as decolonization challenges the understanding of migration and its drivers?
So, as you said, migration as decolonization indeed does challenge the traditional views by reframing it from the one-dimensional process to a multifaceted one. So basically, the traditional understanding of migration that we often have is that migration has been often viewed through the lens of economic factors, where individuals or groups or communities move in pursuit of better opportunities, improved living standards, or even to escape from the different and the adverse conditions in their home countries. As you said, Muhammad, economic considerations such as job availability, wage differentials, and quality of life have always been the primary drivers associated with migration. However, this new concept of migration as decolonization challenges this traditional view by emphasizing a broader and more nuanced set of motivations. It kind of posits that migration can be a form of resistance against first historical injustices. It can be seen as means of reclaiming a cultural identity and a way to, of course, challenge the power dynamic established during the colonial era. In this context, migration is not merely an economic transaction, but a multifaceted process that intersects with issues of power, history, and identity. A good example of this is the Year of Return campaign in Ghana, which it happened in 2019. Ghana declared it as the Year of Return to commemorate the 400th anniversary of the arrival of the enslaved Africans in the United States, for example. This campaign actually aimed to encourage members of the African diaspora from all over the world, especially those descended from slaves, to visit Ghana, connect with their roots, and participate in events highlighting Ghana's rich cultural heritage. So as I said, beyond the economic factors.
True. Looking at it, I quite agree with you, because the traditional understanding of migration often recognizes or neglected the roles of agencies and resistance. So in a nutshell, migration is often seen as a response to economic or political factors, which you have mentioned as a matter of fact, based on complexities. So these perspectives can overlook the active roles of migrants, the active roles migrants play in shaping their destinies, especially migrants from the global north trying to go to the global south. Mm-hmm. So you look at Africa, a very big continent comprises of 53 independent states, and each of these states are unique with their own system of government and politics. Example, the Gambia is a very tiny country with just about 1,100 square kilometers, while Sudan is 250 times larger than the Gambia. And Nigeria has almost about 150 to 160 million people. And there's always a false narrative. This is according to Thompson, actually. But there's also always a false narrative that most of the migration or relocation that happens, it's from Africa to Europe or America. And this is far from the truth, because if you look at statistics, especially in 2020, about 14% of all the African population migrated to the global south. And this is less than that of Asia, which is 40.1%, and within Europe, which is 22.1%. And this is according to Africa, Europe Foundation debate and Mo Ibrahim Foundation's report. So looking at all these histories, looking at all these statistics and false narratives against the African migrants, so what historical and contemporary factors really have contributed to the movement of people from Africa to other parts of the world, in your opinion?
Thank you for the question. I think that if we do think about historical factors, the first thing that comes into mind is colonialism. So the colonial period, especially particularly in the 19th and the early 20th century, led to this migration as colonial powers exploited African resources and established these labor-intensive industries. So the movement of people was often involuntary, driven by economic exploitation and forced labor. There is also, of course, the transatlantic slave trade. So, of course, the historical migration from Africa to the Americas was significantly influenced by the slave trade, which forcibly transported millions of Africans to the Americas between the 16th and the 19th century. This movement, of course, as we all know, was characterized by a lot of brutality, with Africans being captured, enslaved, and transported to work on plantations. There is also a historical factor that is indentured labor. So indentured labor is a system that emerged in the colonial era. It's different from slave trade because Africans were recruited to work in European colonies and their contracts. It's a little bit different, but the system still involved coercion and often led to a lot and significant migration flows. Looking into the contemporary factors, The first that comes into mind that is still relevant today is the economic factors. So the motivations to continue, the motivations to seek better economic opportunities, employment, education, improved living standards in other parts of the world. Something that is very, very relevant today is the political instability and conflict. So the ongoing political instability and armed conflict in various African regions have led to the displacement and migrations of a lot of people. People often tend to flee violence and seek refuge in more stable countries, contributing to contemporary refugee flows. A good example of this is South Sudan, for example. We also have environmental challenges such as droughts, desertification, climate change, of course, they all contribute to migration, especially within the rural communities that might actually migrate to urban centers or cross borders in search of a more sustainable living conditions. We have globalization. I think globalization played a huge role in increasing connectivity, which facilitated contemporary immigration. For example, improved transportation, communication. All these factors kind of enabled the individuals to move more easily and contributes to the rise of global diaspora communities. And of course, the educational opportunities, like, for example, myself, or Muhammad. I mean, if we want to consider the contemporary migration patterns, an example would be East Africa, specifically the Horn of Africa to the Arabian Peninsula. The economic factors such as limited job opportunities and economic hardships alongside political instability have both contributed to a significant migration flow. So many individuals from country, especially in Ethiopia and Somalia, seek employment opportunities in Gulf countries, not necessarily European countries, and that contributes to the labor force in sectors such as constructions and domestic work.
That's true, because that's a very appealing historical account, because when the slave trade was abolished in 1807 by the British, the West introduced what we called colonialism. So in 1960s, Africans decided to emancipate themselves from that cycle, and they decided to introduce globalization, so that there will be interconnectedness among nations and countries. But you will see inequalities among this migration trajectory, because it's very much difficult for people from the so-called third world country to move or to relocate to the so-called first world country without very strict and punitive visa regimes. So that creates a huge gap. And of course, colonialism have left most of the African countries in shambles. That is why today it's very difficult for most of the nations or states within the continent to rise. So that is why in the 21st century, we need to fasten our belts to make sure that we break that chain, but also, have these conversations to see how best we could decolonize migration. We could ensure that the globalization that came into force in the 1980s is respected, but of course in conformity with the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Safe Order Migration. Haffsa, you would agree with me that decolonization process was very violent and chaotic, and left most of the African countries in economic and political stability, like you mentioned. But Achube taught us that, he said, the prevailing doctrine of state sovereignty on the international law today entails the right to exclude non-nationals. And these non-nationals are mostly people who are migrating, especially from sub-Saharan Africa in the global south to the global north in search of economic prosperity. And they are not even considered under the international refugee laws or international human rights migration laws or the 1951 convention. So making the globalization process a false promise. So how does migration intersect with decolonization, sovereignty, self-determination, and issues for African countries?
Very good question. So you mentioned decolonization, sovereignty, and self-determination. I'll try to tackle each one individually, each one of the concepts individually. So looking at decolonization first, migration is closely tied to the process of decolonization because it challenges the artificial borders created during this colonial era that we're talking about. So African nations, shaped by colonial powers, often find themselves dealing with migration patterns that reflect historical injustices. For example, the arbitrary drawing of borders during the colonial period separated communities and ethnic groups, creating tensions that persist today. And this example is the case of the Moroccan Sahara, that is currently a problematic issue because of those borders that were drawn during the colonial period. So the movement of people across these borders can be seen as an attempt to reconnect with cultural roots and challenge the colonial legacy. Moving on to sovereignty. So I think migration impacts sovereignty because it raises questions about who controls borders and defines national identity. So the ability to regulate and manage migration becomes a key aspect of asserting a kind of sovereignty, both to the host countries and the origin countries. So you have African countries are increasingly engaging in regional collaborations to address migration collectively. We see this today. And a good example would be the ECOWAS, so the Economic Community of West African States, which allows for the free movement of people across member states, promoting this kind of economic integration while at the same time respecting national sovereignty. Because what is a country if it's not a sovereign one? And last would be self-determination. So self-determination, migration can indeed also be a tool for self-determination because you have individuals and communities seeking autonomy and control over their own destinies. For instance, movements advocating for independence, like those in Cabinda, often involve migration as a form of resistance against colonial or oppressive rule. So the acts of people moving in pursuit of better political and economic circumstances is in itself an expression of their agency in shaping their future. A good example of the latter would be the movement of the Rastafarian community to Ethiopia. The Rastafarian movement, for those who are not familiar with it, originating in Jamaica, considers Ethiopia as their spiritual homeland. Due to its association with the coronation of Emperor Haile Selassie. So members of the Rastafarian community viewing Ethiopia as a symbol of this African redemption from all kind of colonial oppression. So they kind of migrate to the country in a quest for cultural, reconnection, political economy, and self-determination. So get all three.
Right, just like the balkanization or the petitioning of Africa in 1885, that creates 1884, 1885, create false borders among African countries. You cited the case of Morocco and Ethiopia. Ethiopia is still under a border conflict, and even in the Gambia, recently, in fact, it's not recent. It has been going for over 40 years, like we call the oldest border conflict in West Africa between the separatist movement in Senegal and the Senegalese authorities and in the Gambian borders. Because looking at the country itself, it's surrounded by Senegal on three sides. You have the east, north, and the south, and the west faces the Atlantic. So border problems have been prevalent in Africa because of the colonial masters. So, but our responsibility is now to address this crisis, these border problems, actually, because when you also look at the location of the people, like then the contribution of colonialism, in a negative way, but at some point it also helped the African immigrants who were transported or forcefully moved to work in the mines, factories, and plantations. So that is why after independence, many of these migrants returned to their home countries, bringing their skills, knowledge, and capitals to help rebuild their African countries. And this gave rise to liberation struggles and movement to a lot of African countries, and we'll delve into that later. So we look at diaspora, very, very important in the development of the African continent, because one, they fill labor gaps in their countries, countries of residence, and they also send remittances home to contribute to the economy. Like in the Gambia, for instance, we have 33 to 35% of our GDP coming from remittances sent by people in the diaspora. So how can African countries and communities in the diaspora work together? Like to leverage migration for mutual benefit and development. Like we need that kind of a chain migration, actually, that is fair and balanced. wherein we could host other people, from our countries of origin to our countries of destination where we are resident, so that they could also, share their values, share their cultures, but also, contribute to the labor force of their country of destination and also support their country of origin.
It's a good way to look at migration, I think, because the collaboration between African countries and diaspora communities can indeed create a very synergistic relationship where we can leverage migration for mutual benefit and development. A few of the ways that can work that can be mutually beneficial for both, I would say, the diaspora investment and entrepreneurship. First of all, encouraging diaspora communities to invest in businesses and entrepreneurial ventures in their home countries. And I think this is very important because it can stimulate economic growth, create job opportunities back home, and contribute to the development of local industries. Secondly, something that I think is very relevant as well is the knowledge and skills transfer. Just because, an example, we had a chance to gain this knowledge from elsewhere. It's our duty and our job to share and transfer those skills. So that could be done through the facilitation of programs that encourage the transfer of knowledge and skills from diaspora communities to African countries. It can involve initiatives as mentorships, programs, workshops, partnerships with educational institutions. Another example would be the remittances for development projects. So governments can work with the diaspora by creating mechanisms to channel remittances from diaspora communities into the development project. So this can involve establishing investment funds, partnerships with financial institutions, to kind of direct remittances towards infrastructure, healthcare, education. Of course, there is the obvious lens of cultural exchange and tourism. So the promotion of cultural exchange programs and tourism initiatives, which can encourage members of the diaspora communities to actually visit their home countries, because that will not only foster a sense of connection, but it will also contribute to the local economy through tourism-related activities. Of course, there is the networking and diaspora hubs, so the establishment of networking platforms and diaspora hubs that facilitates connection between diaspora communities and African businesses, NGOs, government agencies. This can be done through the embassies, can be done through other governmental institutions. There is also the education and skill building programs. That could be a good one. So the implementation of education and skill building programs that benefits both the diaspora communities and the African countries. For example, providing scholarship for students in the diaspora to study in African universities, not the other way around, because that's how it's usually done. Because that would contribute to the development of a skilled workforce. Of course, a simple one would be the community engagement integration. So fostering a community engagement initiatives that kind of encourage active participation and integration of the diaspora communities within the African societies. A very, very, very good example on how to include the diaspora, how to merge both so it's mutually beneficial is the Ethiopian Diaspora Trust Fund, so the EDTF, yes. It's established by the Ethiopian government, and I think it's a great initiative, and it aims to basically mobilize the Ethiopian diaspora for direct investment in developing projects. It provides a kind of a platform for the diaspora to contribute financially to the initiatives in areas such as education, healthcare, infrastructure, politics, whatever their interest is. This fund, I think, kind of really exemplifies how collaboration between a government and the diaspora communities can be really structured to channel resources for mutual benefit.
Yeah, I think in 2016, after the electoral turnover in the Gambia, we have had a similar institution that was established. We call it here the Migration for Sustainable Development, something like MSDG. So they also try to, create solutions for diaspora diplomacy, but also to create investments in the Gambia. So I think it's also the responsibilities of governments and its stakeholders and respective departments to create that level playing field, that environment, so that these institutions will flourish. And this, in a way, will address partly the causes of irregular migration journeys in the Gambia, and of course in other African countries where such initiatives or such institutions exist. Thank you very much, Hafsa. So I'm not a very big fan of government or civil societies mortgaging their reintegration assistance programs for returnees to international organizations. However, even though international organizations are key partners, in helping countries either technically or financially to support integration assistance of migrants, but also to promote migration in a form of decolonization, so that there'll be more legal pathways where people could migrate. There could be less strict visa regimes, in case even those who could travel, either through the Sahara or the Mediterranean, when they found themselves in distress, they will be well taken care of. But then let's look at the role of government, civil society, and international institutions, and what could they make out of making migration easy, reliable, and safe, but also decolonize it so that there could be easy movement of people, goods, and services in promoting the decolonization, in promoting globalization that was introduced in the 1980s.
Okay, so you mentioned government, civil society organizations, and international institutions.
Exactly.
I'll start with governments. So I think that governments can indeed play a very, very important role in promoting migration as decolonization and supporting this concept through, first of all, policy formulation. So governments can create policies that kind of recognize migration as decolonizing process. This involves developing frameworks that address historical injustices, respect the rights of migrants, and promote cultural reconnection. It's not an easy task, especially the recognition of the historical injustices. Another way would be the inclusive development plans. So they should integrate migration into broader development plans. So to ensure that the benefits of migration kind of contribute to inclusive economic growth, infrastructure development, and social cohesion, which is very important. Another way that the government can impact migration as decolonization is by encouraging regional collaborations to address migration collectively. Moving on into civil societies and organizations. So one of the ways they can impact migration as decolonization is advocacy and awareness, of course. They can, civil society organizations have the power to advocate for policies that promote the rights and well-being of migrants. This includes raising awareness from the historical context of migration, of course, so it's significant to the decolonization process, Another way is support services. So they should provide support services for migrants, including legal assistance, healthcare, community integration programs. An example of, I had the chance to briefly work with the North Korea Refugee Association, where they had programs tailored to each migrant, helping them with the reintegration into society. The services that they offered contributed to the well-being of migrants and helped them counter challenges they may face, from language barriers to finding work. So that could also be parts of the facilitation of cultural exchange programs to promote this understanding between migrants and host communities. Because when in Rome, do as the Romans do, Last but not least, we talked about international institutions. So international institutions play a pivotal role in upholding human rights standards for migrants. They can play a role in ensuring that the dignity and rights of migrants are protected at all costs. This can involve monitoring and holding nations accountable for the treatment of migrants. There's, of course, the global collaboration that they could facilitate global collaboration on migration issues by kind of encouraging dialogue and cooperation between nations. International institutions can work towards creating this more equitable and just global system that supports this decolonization process. And last but not least, there is the financial support, which kind of provides, I mean, international institutions can provide this financial effort for, as they have funding for it, for initiatives that kind of leverage migration for development. So this includes the funding of projects that promote cultural exchanges, educational opportunities, scholarships, economic development in both host and origin countries. A way that all these three, government, civil society, and international institutions can work together to kind of foster this migration as decolonization would be in research and data collection. So first of all, we have the policy-informed research. So all three, government, civil society organizations, and international institutions can actually collaborate on research, that informs evidence-based policies. It includes understanding the socioeconomic impact of migration and development kind of strategies that align with the goals of decolonization. By doing so, they can establish a kind of a comprehensive data collection mechanisms to kind of understand migration patterns, identify the challenges, and measure the impact of policies. An example was the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration. It was adopted by the United Nations in 2018. And it kind of exemplifies an international effort to address migration comprehensively. So the compact kind of emphasized the need for cooperation between countries, respecting the rights of migrants and recognizing positive contributions of migration to development for both host and origin countries. Today, it still provides a framework that is open for everyone for collaborative action, aligning with the goals of promoting migration as a tool for decolonization.
Yeah, thank you very much, Haffsa. Just to draw back a little bit, I think African countries are doing well in terms of respecting the Global Compact for safe, orderly, and regular migration, or also, trying to amplify, the ideals and values upon which it was established. And these have been manifested by Rwanda lately for opening up their borders to all Africans who hold, to all Africans who hold an African passport to travel without a visa. I think Kenya have also opened their doors for West Africa that have been in existence for far too long now. So I think this decolonization process, it starts from ourselves, and this is a clear manifestation that we're going in the right direction. So it's now a conversation we should have with the West or the global South, the global North, so that at least there could be that, free movement of individuals, and of course, create opportunities for Africans, as well as, opportunities of two ways. If they could come to Africa, seek for opportunities and work as labor immigrants, we should also be able to do that without going through all sort of visa restrictions or strict visa regimes or bureaucracies. And again, what is more important for me is supporting transnational communities and networks. These are manifested in your speech, and this can help migrants to maintain ties in their home countries and also build communities in the countries where they live. For me, international organizations could play a very important role in that, and I think the Global Compact for Safe and Orderly and Regular Migration is on its right footing in that regard. So, Africa's youth demography. Africa, a lot of us argue that our youth are our strength, because we constitute 60% of the total population of the African continent. And we are faced with challenges like structural violence, which involves bad governance, the period of waithood, socioeconomic waithood, and climatic factors. And then we have also, because of structural violence, bad governance, we have seen coup d'etats, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. And then it's important, very imperative for African youths to be involved in shaping the narratives and policies around migration as decolonization. So how do you think we can shape the policies? How do you think young people could be involved in that regard? How do we think we could address this structural violence? And this structural violence will bar young people from migrating through the Sahara Desert or into the Mediterranean to lose their lives.
Well, I think we should first start by trying to engage African youth in shaping the narrative and policies around migration, because that, first of all, ensures inclusivity, dynamism, and representation of diverse perspectives. How can you have policies or discussions or policy even discussions about something without including the youth? Well, it's more than half of the population for African countries. It remains a lens that is incomplete without the youth participation. So I would say, first of all, youth participation in policy discussions. So to actively involve our African youth in policy discussions related to migration and decolonization, that could be done through the establishment of platforms such as youth forums, where their voices can be heard and ideas can be considered in the development of migration policies. A second one is to build up on that would be an inclusive representation in decision-making bodies. And I think Morocco, my country, I come from Morocco, is a leader on that, because we have a youth parliament. We have a youth parliament, which is a platform just like a normal parliament, where young people take part of the decision-making process. So we should all try to advocate for this kind of inclusion of youth representatives in decision-making bodies related to migration and decolonization and all other political issues that our countries, the respective countries, go through. This kind of ensures that policies reflect the needs, aspirations, and concerns of the youth demographic for the youth of tomorrow. Saying that, we can talk about having youth advisory boards and committees dedicated to migration and decolonization issues. We can have, of course, education and awareness programs, so the implementation of these programs among the youth, the African youth, where they can learn about the historical context of migration and its role in decolonization. I think the world is doing already a better job right now, because most of the people do not see migration or trying to kind of run away from we no longer try to run away from our host country, from our origin countries. Because of that, we understand that migration is done because of certain factors that pushed us to migrate, for example. Something I would love, but related to youth, is the leverage digital platforms and social media to kind of amplify the voices of African youth. So to encourage youth-led campaigns, blogs, social media initiatives that kind of share personal stories, challenge the stereotypes, something strong on storytelling, on deconstruction of stereotypes, of course, and the advocates for positive narratives around migration and decolonization. Of course, I'll mention I'm doing a PhD, so I'm supporting academia. So of course, youth-led research and publications is very important to have youth-led research initiatives on migration and decolonization and related topics out there. Of course, entrepreneurship and economic inclusion is something, partnership with other young youth organizations, capacity building and training programs, youth exchanges and internship that could be done in collaboration with different embassies, because these kind of experience can actually broaden perspectives, enhance empathy, and contribute to kind of an informed policy discussions. Of course, mentorship programs that are something that's already exists right now that we should kind of share with our youth that are not aware of. And of course, having this kind of conversation that I'm having with you right now, Muhammad, we're both Africans, we're both young, so this is one way to do it.
Yeah, thank you very much. Like you mentioned about youth parliament in your country, just a few weeks ago, the youth parliament of the Gambia recently concluded their sittings where they address issues of migration and a host of issues that are affecting young people. We also have the National Youth Council, established by an act of parliament, looking into youth activities. So, but we must also have a political will from the central government to be able to support the young people, because the youth parliament have a resolution which they share with the government for actions to look into youth issues, especially the prevalent issues on irregular migration. Just few weeks ago, we have about 21 or so young people who died at the Mediterranean Sea, or because they attempt to enter into Europe, to search for greener pasture. So I think that is very important. What we could do is we could collaborate. We could collaborate with different parliaments, youth parliaments, or different national youth councils. If we have an interface with the African Union, with ECOWAS, with other regional blocs, if that's possible. We discussed about some of these things so that we could come with a resolution. We could have Africa's Parliament, African Youth Parliament, right?
Yes.
We can have Africa's Youth Council. This is an initiative because everything must have a beginning, and we must be willing to lead that crusade in the 21st century. Because in the 1960s, it was the Nkrumahs who led the independence for Africa, and because they have a vision. So in the 21st century, we must also be ready to lead a mark, to lead a transition into having a dialogue with our leaders to solve our intractable challenges that we face. I mean, that comes down to my next question towards you, like looking at the long-term implications of the youth bulk for the continent's development trajectory and its relationship with the rest of the world.
Well, the youth bulk in Africa is definitely, as you mentioned, it's characterized by this significant and growing proportion of young people in the population. So it has a profound and far-reaching implications for the continent's development trajectory and its relationship with the rest of the world. So the long-term implications, I would say the first thing is the demographic dividend. So the demographic dividend is basically, it refers to the growth in an economy that is a result of a change in the age structure of a country's population. So if effectively harnessed, Africa's youth bulk can result in a demographic dividend. This occurs when the working age population is kind of larger than the dependent population, leading to increased economic productivity and development. So these policies can kind of invest in education, healthcare, employment opportunities that are unlocking this dividend. There is also one of the long-term implications would be economic growth and innovation. So a youthful population brings potential for increased innovation, entrepreneurship, and economic growth. I think nobody can deny that. The energy, creativity, and adaptability of young people can drive technological advancements, spur business development, and contribute to a more dynamic and competitive economy. We have a long-term implication would be a labor force dynamics. So the size of this young bulk implies a significant labor force entering the market policies that facilitate skill development, job creation, and workforce participation, which are all crucial for ensuring that demographic advantages translate into a sustainable economic development. We have the urbanization and infrastructure demand, which is also a long-term implication. So if the youth bulk contributes to rapid urbanization as young people move to cities in search for opportunities, university, or work, this trend places demand on infrastructure, housing, and services. So this long-term planning is kind of necessary to accommodate and harness potential of urbanization for economic development. Another long-term implication is the social and political dynamics. So the youth bulk influences social and political dynamics. Young people tend to have different views than the older generation. They often play a central role in shaping cultural trends, social media movements, and just social movements in general, political outcomes. A good example is the Arab Spring that started by youth mainly. So their aspirations, their demands for good governments, their demands for better rights, their participation in the civic activities, all of these can actually shape the continent's political landscape. Of course, we can mention the education and skills development, how it underscores the importance of investing in education and skill developments. The access to quality education, vocational training, and higher education opportunities are all essential for equipping young people, African young people, with the skills needed for a rapidly evolving job market. Of course, there is global competitiveness. I'm very happy to see at the Institute today that we have a lot of African students, but in the future, I hope that this demographic advantage that we have can enhance Africa's global competitiveness in the job markets, in universities, with a skilled and youthful workforce, continent can position itself as an attractive destinations for investments, technological collaborations, and global trade, but at the same time, we would have brains and we'd have personalities and people that are representing Africa elsewhere or just working on Africa in Africa. So we have, of course, migration trends. We have healthcare challenges, of course, climate change and environmental stewardship, and of course, international partnerships. So if we do have Africa's youth bulk has indeed implications for these international partnerships. Collaborative efforts between African nations and the global community should focus on supporting youth-led initiatives, fostering this innovation, and addressing shared challenges such as education, healthcare, and climate change that are common topics right now, common issues, common challenges in the countries of Africa. And then, of course, last but not least, is conflict and security. So a long-term implication would be the unemployment and underemployment, among the youth, which can contribute to a social unrest and in some cases conflict, which was exactly the case for Tunisia, for example, during the Arab Spring. So addressing this kind of economic disparities, promoting social cohesion, and providing avenues for work participation in governments contribute to this long-term peace and security.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Hafsa. You see, we are not only future leaders, but partners in development, partners and stakeholders, because as government anticipates, they must anticipate together with the young people, what kind of percentage of young people will we have in our urban areas? What kind of infrastructure will we need? What kind of new opportunities will be needed at a material time? And these are very important in shaping the trajectory and the future of our respective African countries. Because dating back from history, I started from Egypt. In 1952, it was Gamal Abdel Nasser who deposed King Farouk as a young person, as a young soldier, and became a flagship, even though he was a kind of a dictator. So you look at independence, Kwame Nkrumah, when he was liberating Ghana from colonialism, he was only 41 years. The same thing for Sadauda Karaba Jawara in the Gambia. Transcending to even to the West, you look at Benjamin Franklin when he was writing the America's Constitution, he was only 36. You look at the liberation, Martin Luther King Jr. was only 22 years. In fact, the father of Gambian politics, Edward Francis Small, was only 29 years. So when he was leading, for people to be paid on the value of their labor, to be respected, to be dignified as Gambian people, establishing the first Senegambian media outlook. So all these people are young people at that time. You look at Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew, when he was coming, he was just at age 36, a very young person who was able to transform Singapore, into a modern country that become an envy of the world. So, but now the things are more developed, things are evolving by the way, and governments that do exist are employed by young people. In essence, most of the young people are the one who votes for during elections. So therefore, they should be considered, they should be anticipating together with the government should consider them so that at least they understand their problems and they solve these problems together. Otherwise, we'll be having this conversation over and over without a solution. We just have 5 minutes towards the end of the program. If you are listening, we are here right in Geneva, and then you may write your questions on the comment sections, and Hafsa would be so happy to answer your questions. So Hafsa, scooping into the last questions, I have two for you before we wrap up. What is your message for the African youth?
That's a tough one. Well, I think I would say in your diversity lies the strength that will shape the narrative of Africa's future. Your energy, creativity, and spirit hold the power to redefine the contours of the global order through migration, paving the way for a more just, equitable world. So I invite the African to embrace your cultural roots as a source of strength and resilience. Through migration, you have the opportunity to reconnect with your heritage, challenge historical narratives, and contribute to a global discourse that celebrates diversity and fosters understanding. You should always recognize that you are agents of positive change. Your ability to challenge the status quo, questions inequities, and advocate for justice positions you as catalysts for a more inclusive global world. So your voices matter, and they have the potential to shape policies and perceptions. I want to remind you that your demographic dividend is not just a statistic, but a force for a change. As you enter the workforce, engage in education, and navigate the complexities of migrations, seize the opportunities to contribute to contribute to economic growth, innovation, sustainable development in Africa and beyond. Be champions of gender equality, recognize the importance of equal opportunities for all genders in the context of migrations, both girls and boys. Your commitments to dismantling gender barriers will contribute to a more just and equitable global landscape. And don't forget to always embrace cultural diplomacy as a tool for bridge building. Through migration, you become cultural ambassadors, fostering mutual understanding and cooperation between nations. Your ability to navigate diverse cultural landscapes can break down barriers and build connections. So I invite you to embrace your role also as environmental stewards. As you migrate and engage with different environments, consider the impacts of climate change, advocate for sustainable practices, contribute to a global movement aimed at preserving the planet for future generations. Don't forget to build inclusive networks that transcend borders. As Muhammad said earlier, collaborate with your peers from diverse backgrounds, both within Africa and internationally. Your ability to work together, like we're doing right now, across cultural boundaries can foster a sense of unity. It can contribute to a more interconnected world. So be pioneers of entrepreneurship and innovation. Know that you are not alone in this journey. Your aspirations for a more just and equitable global order through migration resonates with countless others like us. By joining forces, sharing experiences, and learning from one another, you form a global community working towards common goals. So in every step you take, you are contributing to a narrative that transcends borders, challenges historical legacies, and shapes a future characterized by justice, equity, and shared humanity. So the journey may be complex, but your resilience and determination are the driving forces that will propel Africa's youth towards a future where migration becomes a beacon of hope and empowerment.
Well, that is quite inspiring, heartwarming, yet so touching, Hafsa. And to the policymakers, what do you have to tell the governments? What do you have to tell the governments before we bid farewell to our viewers?
I would love to invite governments to humanize the migration stories, to think of both sides of every picture, to invite those African youth and those migrants to countries like their own. The greatest countries were built with the collaboration of different nationalities with different identities. No country is independent on all levels. No country can be independent. We live in a global world where we need one another. So we should treat each other like we need one another. I think that we should put hand in hand. I invite also the international community, international institutions like governments to further alter and work on their policies to make it easier for migrants to feel at home outside of home, to make it easier for migrants to go back to home when that is the case. And this advice or the message I'm giving is for both governments in host countries and in origin countries. I think that is very important as a message to kind of pass by.
Thank you very much, Hafsa. I will close this with two very important quotes that resonates with me and many young people. One was adduced by a Gambian politician, well respected, in the name of Khalifa Saleh. He said, "Without knowing who you are, you wouldn't know what you own. And if you don't know what you own, somebody will appropriately take what belongs to you and live in the heaven, whilst you vegetate in a state of abject poverty and the wreck of the art. And that also transcends to what President Roosevelt's claim. He said the government is us. So I'm taking it to be young people because we are the majority of the voters. He said, not an alien power over us. The ultimate rulers of our democracies are not the presidents, are not the congressmen, but the voters. You know, quite interesting. Thank you very much, Haffsa. It's a privilege to have you. And for those who are listening, we thank you for joining us, watching and listening. We thank you for joining us. Until we come your way next time, I will hand over the baton to Sheikh Omar Silla to wrap up.
Thank you very much, Dibba. I mean, Haffsa, amazing. You look Moroccan, you sound American, and you think Swiss. You know, I can see the communist America, Morocco, and Swiss in you. But thank you very much for that. And I'm saying special thanks to Gunjur Online TV for offering us this opportunity. Of course, live streaming on Facebook, on YouTube. It's amazing, and we hope to support them more, and we hope that they will continue supporting us. A few more questions online. Hafsa will excuse your time. A few more questions. One is coming from Simo. Simo is saying, how can we change the narrative about migration? I'll couple that question with another one coming from Musin. Musin is saying, how are you using your own personal experience as a student migrant for decolonization?
Okay, thank you for the questions. Thank you to everyone that joined us online. So to answer Simo's question, changing the narrative about migration requires indeed a comprehensive and collaborative approach involving various stakeholders, including governments, media, civil society, individuals. One way that could be done, and I'm gonna answer the question from Fadwa as well at the same time. Fadwa is my mother, so I just wanted to say hi.
Oh.
So, it's nice. So one of the ways that we could change the narrative about migration, it's also the way I'm using my status as a migrant student to kind of change this narrative of migration is, first of all, to promote positive storytelling. We should highlight positive and diverse stories of migrants and their contributions to their host societies. We should showcase success stories, achievements, and resilience of individuals who have overcome challenges, personal narratives that can humanize the migration experience. Secondly, we should always try to combat stereotypes and misconceptions. Yes, it can be tiring. Yes, it can be hectic. But addressing and challenging stereotypes and misconceptions about migrants, dispel common myths by providing this factual information about the reasons for migration, the economic contributions of migrants, and the cultural enrichment they bring. Of course, we should highlight the economic contributions. So we should always try to emphasize the economic contributions of migrants to host countries, illustrates how migrants fill labor gaps, they contribute to economic growth, and they often play essential roles in sustaining industries such as healthcare, agriculture, and technology. Like I said, what is a country without migrants?
That's fine. Sir, you want to say something? I'll take a last one from Ibrahima. Ibrahima Toure is saying, how can the global community work to decolonize the migration process and address these historical and ongoing impacts of colonization on migration patterns and policies?
I think we can first try to acknowledge historical injustices. From the colonialism is a very crucial first step. So the acknowledgements of the impact of colonial policies on displacement, exploitation, and the disruption of communities, that's one. I think secondly, we should think about reforming immigration policies and reevaluating and reform immigration policies to kind of be more inclusive and just. So to create this kind of pathways for legal and orderly migration that reflect the needs and aspirations of individuals and communities. Another point would be to address root causes of migration. So such economic inequality, political instability, conflict, environmental degradation. We should understand the root causes of the problem so we can solve it. We should support self-determination. of communities and nations. So policies should empower communities to make decisions about their own development and address the consequences of historical colonial interventions. Of course, we should think of promoting culture sensitivity, global economic justice. That could be done by addressing economic imbalances and promoting fair trade, by creating conditions that allow countries to develop independently without exploitation, reducing the economic drivers of migration. Of course, we have protection of human rights. So we should always prioritize and protect human rights of migrants, uphold international human rights standards, and ensure that migrants are treated always with dignity and respect, regardless of their legal status. I mean, speaking of irregular migration or illegal migration, it's very sad what's happening in Tunisia right now. So that should be something that should not be negotiable. Of course, we should educate ourselves and others on inclusivity, incorporate education on migration, colonial history, and cultural diversity into school curriculums globally. So decolonizing the curriculum, decolonizing the knowledge, deconstructing the knowledge is very important. And of course, empowering the diaspora communities, challenging discrimination and xenophobia. And I think we're way past time, so I'll try to keep it short. Yeah, and then of course the support research on colonial legacies is very important as well.
Dr. Haffsa Kouskous.
Not yet.
Thank you very much.
Sila, before we go, Haffsa is my TA for 2 of my electives this semester. One is identity and conflictualities in contemporary Africa, and discourses and practices in international organizations, and she's been supportive throughout, and we have to acknowledge her. Haffsa, thank you very much for being there for us.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for this thought-provoking conversation. I really enjoyed talking to you today.
Thank you.
That's all we have for you, and special thanks to Gunjur Online TV for giving us the platform to interact with the audience. Until we come your way next time, it's a bye-bye from us in the studio.
Thank you.
Mr. Riva.
Programa kerana.
Yeah, it was wonderful. Wonderful.
So we did well?
Yeah.
Ooh. So thank you very much. Thank you so very much for giving us